Welcome to World History on a Page, Part 5. Last time we drew the dynasties of China across the top, and today we're going to continue. This time we're going to continue with Korea and then Japan. We'll start in the AD period, and again I'm going to draw my band first so I can write the dynasties within it. After 1 AD, there is an era in Korea called the Choson. And then roughly the same time where China splits into north and south groups, there are three different kingdoms competing there in Korea. Finally, one of those three kingdoms wins out. It's called Silla, and it begins in the 600s. It then is defeated in the 900s, and the one that takes its place is called Koryo. Finally, in the 1300s, the dynasty called Yi, and has another name, Chosen. Around 1910, Japan took occupation of Korea, and that continued all the way up to the end of World War II. And as you know then, since then Korea has been split into North and South. To continue above that with Japan. In the early years here in the after 1 AD, the era was called the Yamato era. And then in the 600s there was a period of reform and making the central government more important. The emperors already were there in the Yamato, but now the emperors take charge in a very centralized way. And after that reform, we have an era called the Nara, and that's named after the capital city. That the Nara falls within the 700s. From the 700s on, I'm going to explain Japan by drawing two bands, because the rest of these eras have more than one name. One of the names usually is a place name associated with that era, and the other name is a family that's dominant during that era. So at the very end of the 700s, we begin with the era called the Heian, Heian, and that's a place name that was their capital city, but it's also known as Kyoto. And of the family that became dominant is the Fujiwara family. When we get to the 1100s, both of those things change. The era is called Kamakura, and that is a place name. That's where their military base was. And the family in the Kamakura era was the Minamoto family. In other words, you may see books that refer to it one way or the other. Then there was a change again in the 1300s. Fortunately for us drawing the diagram, the same year as the change in Korea. And now the next dynasty is called Muromachi. That's the place name, and that was a district. And the family at that time was Ashikaga. Finally, in the early 1600s, the Tokugawa family takes over, and their capital was called Edo, but nowadays we call that place Tokyo. These last three eras that I drew are the times when the emperor was not in the leadership role. He was a figurehead. The ruling was actually done by a high military officer called the shogun. So when you hear about the shogunate, that means it was one of these three eras. But when we reached the year 1867, the emperor decided to take power back into his own hands, and the emperor's name was Meiji, and I'm going to write the entire name over here for your reference, M-E-I-J-O-J-I, Meiji. And the capital city at that time was Tokyo. The Meiji era lasted for the lifetime of that emperor, all the way from 1868 it was, all the way to 1911. And then we continue from there, which we won't draw on the map, with the more recent history of Japan. Finally, for this sheet on Asia, just a few things about India. Before our sheet starts, about at least by 2500 BC, we have what's called the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Harappa Civilization. The Indus was the river that flows along the west side of the Indian subcontinent. So we get our name, India, from the name of the river, Indus. And we get our term Hindu from that exact same word, just by putting an H sound in front of it. Hindu referring to the religions that grew up there in the land of India. The Indus Valley civilization had faded, and by the time a very important and large event took place in the 1500 BC, it was called the Aryan invasion. Tribes from north of India came down and militarily conquered the people of India, and that's when the caste system started, because they put themselves over the other people. That name Aryan is probably a name you've seen before, because scholars noticed that their language, Sanskrit, had a lot of words in common with the language of Iran. And notice the name Iran, how similar it is to the word Aryan. And similar to ancient Turkey, the Hittites, and in fact similar to European languages like Latin and Greek. And so the conclusion was drawn that there must have been an ancestral language that ended up in all of those places, and so that language has been given the name Indo-European, because you can see it in India and all the way to Europe. In most of the time, India was divided into many, many different and competing principalities. So I'm only going to draw a few times when the country came close to being united by larger empires. I'll draw one here before 1 AD, roughly from the BC 300s to the BC 100s. The dynasty was called Maurya, M-A-U-R-A. And then again from about 300s AD to 500s AD, again, most of the country was unified. These empires usually were based in the north and then tried to get as much of the south as they could. This was called the Gupta Empire. From about the 1200s on, the Muslims were dominant in ruling, often in multiple areas. But around the 1500s, again, there was a dynasty that united most of India. This was under Muslim rule, and the dynasty was called the Mughal. M-U-G-A-L, sometimes it's spelled M-U-G-H-A-L. From the 1700s on, Britain was getting more and more control over India until finally it took complete control, ending the Mughal Empire, and in the 1800s it became known as British India, and Queen Victoria was the ruler of British India. India was got its independence in 1947, and the part that we remember from the Indus Valley, the part around the Indus River, formed its own country, Pakistan, and the central part became India, and then way over on the east, another part which was predominantly Muslim became Bangladesh. That is the end of this part. Remember that more details and instructions on how to make these diagrams are at my website, www.foundbytes.com. Click on Learn History. Thank you.